Welcome to a special Patreon and Patreon preview episode of Salsido Paranormal. I'm your host, James Salsido, here again with Jen, the Arcane Observer, co host of the show, and tonight we are covering experiences, true paranormal stories from the web. As always, you can find all episodes of the show along with links to social media, ways to listen, and ways to support the show at the website, and that is salsidoparanormal.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.com. Um, and you can support the show in all kinds of ways. You can share the show with others and rate and review it on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find extra content, including this show and others, um, at the Patreon page. And you can get all that content for as little as $1 a month. And you can also check out the merchandise store and find all kinds of shirts and other items with designs on them made by friends of the show. Support is never expected but always appreciated, as there are expenses in making these shows. And I can confirm that I had a few recently. Uh, so yeah, things do happen, and you gotta upgrade and replace things, and that's how it goes. Um, but also, please check out links in the episode description of the shows for friends of the show, and that would of course include Jen, the Arcane Observer, and her own channel, and then Michael Strange and Troubled Minds Radio and the Troubled Minds Radio Network, KUAP Digital Broadcasting. And there you can hear all kinds of amazing shows from many amazing people as well as myself, and you can listen to that 24/7. So this is this is a Patreon show that will be released on the regular feed a week after it comes on the Patreon. Just because I will not be available next weekend as I'm recording this to record shows. So, um, and I do love these experiences shows, just because there's so many out there. I can find, I'm not even joking, four, four or more of these true stories online per day, um, that are new that I haven't seen before every day. And that to me is just amazing because that shows people are always having experiences, and have always been having experiences, and that's a big part of what the show is about, is letting people know that you're not alone if you had one, and also that everything paranormal, supernatural, unexplained does not have to be and is not always evil, despite what you may see on popular TV shows and movies. So anyway, um, so yeah, that's where we start here, and Jen, thank you again for being on the show with me.
Oh yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I think it's the point that you made, that it's not always evil as people would think of it, or negative. Many times over again, if we can accept that that is the case and just have a certain amount of, I guess, scruples about the way the encounters go, they can lend themselves to be sort of helpful in a way at times. I've always accounted for that I believe that is true. And it does still play into that, which is the paradigm in many people's minds, that these experiences could be negative, that maybe they are solely negative. But even their other belief systems about what the positive would look like, sometimes those things are, in action as well. And so I do think it's important to differentiate that, not all experiences are negative in a way. And that there can be some positive experiences just as there is in life, and we can open up um, more to understanding our world and our realm that we live in if we can see things that way. And it gives a lot of freedom and a lot more, I guess, a reality check that there is unseen forces at work on a regular basis. And I look forward to hearing the accounts that you have to share with us this evening.
Yeah, yep, thank you. Yeah, I do think it's important. So often online you see sort of popular figures that say, well, everything aliens ghosts or creatures that are all negative. It's all out to get you. And then you see the opposite of where it's all out there to help you. It's all
Hmm.
positive. And I
Well,
don't think
clearly, yeah,
it's
must
like,
be
well,
both.
no, there's accounts of both. So,
Mhm.
but yeah,
Yeah. And I hope people
um,
will call in with their accounts. So I hope that they won't be bashful in sharing. This is an open forum in this case because it's a special show. And so anything that spurs the mind, I hope they do feel welcome to speak on behalf. And it's not difficult to get up here and to speak about it. Everyone is very open and collaborative. And so it's always fun to have these shows where we can hear, special stories from listeners or whoever is, um, you know, accompanying the show. So I hope that people will feel inspired to go ahead and if they have a story or they've even heard a story that they might want to share them. It's always fun to hear those and to hear all accounts, Absolutely.
yes, and even if you just have thoughts on a story that we share here, one of these true
Absolutely.
stories from whatever I find or whatever we talk about here on these Patreon shows, you're always welcome. Yep. So
I hope they feel free to share
just
that. Absolutely.
yeah, yep. And just there's a icon in the bottom of the screen usually that says something like request to speak, and then you click on that, and as soon as I notice it on the screen, I will get to that, and you'll be on the show with us. Um, so yeah, let me see here now. Getting to these stories here, these true stories. This first one says, "Oh, I lost it. Oh, there it is." My wife and I were both sitting in the loft couch and talking about birthday party stuff. We both heard, "Dad," in a girl's voice that sounded like my 10-year-old daughter's, but she was not with me this week. My son was on the tablet, but it wasn't loud either. My baby daughter is only 8 months old and was in the crib playing, but she can't talk yet, and that's where that one ends. I always wonder with these voices and these random things that happen, is it a time overlap? Were they hearing the writer's daughter there from another point in time, and somehow it just managed to get through to where they were at? And again, so often, just as we were talking about there in the very beginning, when something like this happens, and I understand and the fear and the reaction to that, but the automatic reaction for some people is, oh, it's a negative being. It's a mimic trying to get your attention and to do something to you. But there's no anything else. There's nothing else in this account of anything else happening. There's
Right.
just the sound. And so I always wonder when it comes to kinds of accounts where it's just one thing, but nothing else after, and no consequences other than being people are being freaked out, which is understandable.
Right.
Is that a time overlap?
I think once again, I think they were kind of being drawn into wanting to talk about that sometime soon because just as you said, I mean, there was nothing necessarily negative except that it was out of the ordinary. And so, yeah, it does lend to the possibility that could be something, of the kind that it's some sort of you know, something to do with time and spatial reality that it could be true. I might have to step away for a minute. I gotta put some rice on 'cause I'm cooking dinner. But so
No problem.
I'll be right back.
No problem. I will keep on going, and we'll go from there. So, but yeah, and just to remind everyone else, if you're listening here live or even on all future Patreon shows that you have to happen to catch on Discord, you're welcome to join in. If you have any thoughts on the true stories that I'm sharing or on what we've said, um, or your own experiences that are similar, that's what these Patreon shows are for, is for interaction. And so let me get to reading this next one here. Let's see. I have to scroll down a little bit. So this one says, about 20 years ago, I was at my then girlfriend's house, and as it was late, she wanted to go to sleep. I was still wide awake, and her older brother was watching TV in the lounge, so I joined him for a while. We both sat there, watching whatever it was we were watching. The lights were off at the time, so the only available light was coming from the TV. The rest of the house was almost total darkness. The double doors to the lounge were also both wide open, and you could see into the long hallway. Anyway, we're both sitting there, and suddenly I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye to my right. It was a tall, dark shadow figure, and it leaned over at a 45-degree angle to peek into the room from the hallway. The very second I turned my head to react at what I saw, it was gone. At the time, I just thought I was seeing things and didn't think a lot more of it. However, their house apparently was haunted. I was told an old man died in the house years before they moved in, and he's been seen before by my ex's mother doing the exact same thing. Apparently, she would also hear footsteps walking slowly up and down the hallway. And that's where that one ends. Um, it does sound like there's activity there. The shadow figure, and then the sounds of the footsteps, and the shadow figure being seen by multiple people at different times. Um, the whole shadow aspect to me is fascinating because I feel like it's impossible to know or to pinpoint that there is one type of being that is a shadow figure. I feel like based on all the accounts of I've heard and read and my own experiences and things, um, that the shadow aspect is just the appearance. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's anything good or bad directly until you actually get the feelings from it that you do when you have these encounters. So I find that one to be really neat in that it just is there and it looks around. I always wonder too when these figures look around, not just shadow figures, but any kind of a apparition or figure looks around the corner. Are they trying to get attention or are they not? Are they just looking to see who's there? Because maybe to them there's not supposed to be anyone there. And then when they're seen, they're actually frightened, possibly in some cases, and then back off and end up disappearing. Or the person that sees it can't see it anymore for whatever reason with all these events. So these kinds of accounts to me are really neat because again, nothing bad really happening there. But I always wonder how often are we the ones that frighten others out there that we think of as ghosts or shadow figures or creatures or whatever. Um, how often do we all frighten each other? Um, just by encountering each other out there, because it's there's just so many accounts of things happening, but then there's nothing after. So, um, looking at everything here, it looks like the chat's good. So I will keep on going until Jenna's able to join back up again, and no worries there. I'll get through at least one more, and then we'll see where we're at. And moving on here, and then of course we can circle back to that last one as well if we need to. This one says, I had lost my mom 2 years prior and was going through a divorce and just needed some time alone. My 3 kids stayed with their dad. I went to a town full of antique stores and bed and breakfast places for a couple of days. So this one B&B I stayed at was a little out of town, and I had booked a little cabin, but it was really new and nice. The first night, I woke up and saw a little boy standing at the end of the bed, wearing old-fashioned clothes. He said something like, "Where's my mother?" I had left a small lamp on, so it wasn't totally dark. By the time my brain connected with my mouth to scream a a little, he was gone. I assumed I had been dreaming and tried to go back to sleep with two lamps on this time. So the next night, I come in from shopping, get ready for bed. I always read before bed and always have a glass of water nearby on the nightstand. I woke up thirsty and reached over to my water glass when I felt a light touch on my arm, like someone was guiding my arm away from the glass. The lamps were on again, so it wasn't very dark in the room. I looked at my water glass and it wasn't there, but there was a lady standing there, like in the nightstand. They were occupying the same space somehow. She was wearing an old style dress with an apron on and was holding her hand out like she was shushing a child. She was whispering or talking low to a man standing in front of her, but he wasn't very clear, maybe because I was already so scared. It felt like she was gesturing for me to wait a minute, like you would a child who's interrupting. I was so scared, I just flew across the bed to the other side of for the light switches by the door. I just kept saying, oh my God, turning on every light in the place. I did not sleep anymore. I asked the owners of the B&B if they ever saw anything or heard anything weird or paranormal, and they just said no, like I was being ridiculous. I had not been drinking. I swear this story is true. And that's where that one ends. Um, that's a lot to have happen in a relatively short amount of time. So I'm just curious about the history of the place. Some places, you never know when it comes to hotels or bed and breakfasts, um, how the people that own it are going to approach all these things. Some places they embrace it and they let everyone know that the place is said to be haunted. Other places, other people do not want anything to do with that because they think it's going to hurt their business. So I'm just really curious about the history of the place and if any of those people were there at some point in time before that, especially given the fact that they were wearing what sounds like old-fashioned clothes. So, welcome back, Jen. You're welcome to comment on anything you want to.
Well, I just caught the the last bit, and I think that, many times over that locations you wouldn't expect to be haunted.
Hmm.
I mean, haunted too, the accounts of what haunted would mean is different
Yeah,
for different people. I mean, like they could assume that and it kind of plays into also of like what kind of entities or what kind of energy is it projected by the individual. You have accounts like poltergeist where it's claimed that it is generated from the mind of a pre-adolescent female. Is very but oftentimes it can be male or female. I've heard accounts of that. Or it can be from an individual who's just open to, they have a very strong emotional, energetic world that they are working with, and it projects out into the real world, but it's coming from them. Other
right.
people say that there's no answers to it, James. So many times over, they
Yeah,
say that it's not necessarily that actually there are certain entities that are drawn to that, and they are using the energy to produce the sort of effect, to whatever ends that might be. But when it comes to locations, you would assume that every location is haunted since someone has passed away Absolutely, pretty much over anywhere at all, there has been a passing, and there must be a memory card of sorts in that location. And then, how or why is it that it happens? Some people can the Amityville story, for example, at that house and location, people had a prolific experience of the extraordinary, of the paranormal, of the psychical realm, but others move in and they recount that they have no experiences whatsoever. And that is what's driving the force between so much skepticism, because it's assumed that it must be locational, but it might have something, like I was talking about with the poltergeist, to do with the individuals themselves, that there's something unique. And that if you are in the presence of it, because many times over, people who are extremely skeptical, when they are in the presence of someone who is also, I mean, doesn't skepticism has nothing to do with it, but perhaps they are not experiencing these sort of paranormal things, or they are not familiar with having these kinds of experiences, they can have those experiences, it seems, around individuals who frequently have those experiences. It seems like it almost uses that individual. It doesn't really use them, but it's a sort of projection out, and it's, I don't know, it's really interesting. So I think that there's something to do with the human interaction. Now, is the location haunted, whether people are there or not? Which is a really fascinating aspect, because I've always loved that kind of trope in stories and books that I've read of locations being haunted with no one living there. Just
Right.
sort of the accounts that they are living there, and then someone comes into the environment and they begin to watch and interact with them. But it speaks to the unseen realm, and it's frustrating because it doesn't it's the answers are so personal about that. Now, when it comes to like bed and breakfasts and places where people are socially gathered, like hotels and things like that, it seems like it would be a given that it would be haunted. I worked at a
Yeah.
hotel when I was younger, and I remember an account that there was a chef who died of a heart attack, in the middle of a shift, and there was another account
Mm.
of up in one of the rooms. And he'd worked there for a long time, like a decade or something of the kind. So you wonder if is the kitchen haunted. And then I heard another account that an individual had passed away in their room, and they weren't discovered for a week because they had put a no housekeeping sign on the door. So it wasn't until they started noticing the smell that they actually went in there and found him. So it's things like that, and then everything begins to kind of grow off of that, and there's something about the suggestion and the power of the mind, but then that it begins to access something. It's just, and there are accounts where people know nothing of the history, and they encounter
Right.
phenomenon, and then it lines up with stories that they did not know had occurred. So, I don't know, as far as how do they could use it as a way to draw in customers, and then, like you were saying, that some others see it as a stigma. And there are properties, stigmatized properties, where, you know, people don't want to live in it because they know what happened there. There's a house nearby where I live right now, literally across the street. And I knew the individual, and they recently did pass away. And it was in the middle of February, and they passed away from, for reasons I'm not going to mention, but
Hmm.
they passed away, and they were there for over a week, but it was the middle of February in the winter. But the person was kind of a recluse anyway, and no one noticed. And then it was discovered by a family member who had come by. And so that house is still sitting there. And like I wonder what it's going to be like for the people who move in there, because the individual was a pleasant individual. It was natural causes. It's just, it does make you wonder, but it happens all the time. But how significant is it? And I think the landlord actually is very, apprehensive actually to lease it out again, given the circumstances. I think he's waiting for it to kinda, it's been almost a year, and the house has just sat there. And that happens, I think, more often than not, in some cases.
Oh yeah. I We can probably go through a list of places that are accounts where people say that they this place near them, kind of like what you just said, but also someone even from landlords themselves say I cannot get anyone to stay in this house.
Mhm.
Every people move in, they're there for a week or a couple weeks or a month, or
Right.
even in extreme cases like days, and then they're gone.
Yeah. Yep.
So The other thing about that story I just read, the true story, it was in the beginning, so you may not have caught it, but the writer there said that she was going around to antique stores and looking around those while she was staying
Mm.
in this town. And I wonder, I mean, there are reports of energy and entities being attached to objects.
Oh my
Was
gosh.
there literally no reports ever in this bed and breakfast of anything happening? And it wasn't so much the place that she was staying; it was something to do with going through all these antique stores.
Okay, yeah, I did miss that part because I was up, in the kitchen, so I didn't catch that part. I came back to just the bed and breakfast haunting and how prevalent is it, and that made me think of all of those things. But thank you, because I wasn't aware of that part. But no, there are certain cultures that won't even, when a person passes away, they literally like dispose of all of their belongings, except for like close family keeping a few things,
Hmm.
specific things that they don't want to dispose of for memory's sake or because it's been kept in the family for so long and so they have to carry it on and keep carrying it. It's a classic idea of like the cursed objects and things like that, but there are many cultures where they do not keep anything, from the past. And it's such a weird thing right now in our culture that it's unusual in this culture in a way, in a culture where they have a choice in it. But they choose to reuse, and I am guilty of this myself. I have a house full of things that are secondhand, and it's about the only way that I buy is secondhand, just because it's a better deal than buying it first,
Oh
brand
yeah.
new. And so I myself am guilty of that, but knowing full well, that this item or this piece of furniture or that piece of furniture, that it's obviously carrying the energy of wherever it's been. You just kind of cross your fingers. But antique stores in particular, where you have something, I don't think it would make a difference about the age of it, but just but in a way, I do think it matters. I think that something that has carried on for a long time and gathered the energy of maybe several owners, the way that houses do, that it has an effect on the object that becomes, I do believe it has an impact on those items and things like that. But what's fascinating though is the cultures that disagree with taking up, like there are accounts of used wedding dresses and there are
Oh yeah.
tragic stories attached to them, and then the bride wears the dress, they find it up in an attic closet or something like that, and they wear the dress, and then, something happens, and then it's a tragic story, and then it goes on and on like that, and it carries on. So, there are stories like that, aplenty. There are
Hmm.
stories too of like, items that belonged to dangerous individuals, and it's got to do with that psychic touch phenomenon. I can't remember the technical term for it. It's called, it's not kinetic,
I
is
think
it? I
I
don't think it's psychic. What is it
I
called? I
think
can't
it's
remember.
psychometry.
Psychometry.
Psychomet.
Yes, I
I
do think
think
that's what
so.
it is. But it's where you touch something and you get an impression of it. But I think that that draws people to things as well as repels others. So some individuals
Hmm.
are like attracted to this certain what they're picking up on, and others are repelled by it. And I think it's a very personal experience. But there have been accounts I've heard, like family members of mine say, like my aunt might say, she went into a store and she heard, it was calling my name,
Right.
and not from she's not even meaning it from a psychical perspective, just meaning that like I was supposed to find this item. So, but is it the idea of these being an extension of the self in some way? But how ironic that the way that they line up. Not to
Yeah.
talk too much, but there was an account that I had one time where I ran into this woman, a stranger, and I ran into her, and I had come across a ring. It was an Avon ring that I had found. I had found it in a park, and it was, nothing special. It was plastic gem. It wasn't anything, valuable, but I found it, and I had kept it. I had found it just randomly on the ground, and I had kept it. And then I came across this woman, and I was young. I was probably like 19 or something like that. And I came across this woman, and we were having a conversation, and she was wearing the exact same ring. And I was like, "That is crazy." Like, "Where'd you find that ring? Where'd you get it from?" Because I have the same ring, and she had also just randomly found that ring. She had just been like, rummaging
Wow.
through jewelry at a thrift store, and she had found that ring. But we were both sitting there in possession of this same ring and having a conversation. Now, it wouldn't be significant. People would say like, "Well, it happens," but this was like kind of a rare thing. It wasn't just like a typical item that was, popular at the time. It was something from like it was like from the 70s or the 80s or something like that, or the 90s. It was just this, you know, old Avon ring, but we both had the exact same one. It was just so strange. I thought it was at the time, but
Yeah, and no worries about talking. I'm always happy to hear you and your experiences and these things. But I wonder too with that because you hear about that with houses, people being
yes,
drawn to houses, buying them and renting them, and sometimes it has a positive outcome, other times not so much. So, and if you think about
yeah,
it, a house is just a mass collection of
antique.
objects.
Yes, it
That
is.
too,
Yeah,
yeah, and the construction of it and all those things. Funny story, I've mentioned this before. My dad paints houses and buildings,
yeah.
outside and inside. And at one point, one of the places he was painting, they had a bunch of books they were going to get rid of, and he saw this cookbook, and then he thought it might be useful and thought it looked neat, so he picked it up, and they were going to get rid of him anyway, so he brought it back home with him. And
Yeah.
after that, they started hearing footsteps and having an increase in weird things happen in my dad and my stepmom's house.
Mm.
And my stepmom, who is somewhat sensitive to these things as well, figured out that it was this book, and they got rid of that book, and everything calmed down.
Yeah, she was probably like, everything changed when that book came in. Yeah,
Yes.
or something to that effect. Yeah, I've seen that in real life. Where
Yep.
people, because it is just interesting with adults, with older people. When I was young, I remember accounts of like um just the cautionary thing of acknowledging, because the secondhand movement is fairly modern. People typically handed things down, and you would know them directly. They would hand. I remember when I was a little girl, there was always the hand-me-downs would come down from family and neighbors and cousins and things like that that would hand them down through. Now it's expanded out to where it is just the thrift stores are prolific, and the antique stores don't even really, they're rare. And this is regional, I think, in the United States. So for reference, I'm in the Midwest regional area. So I know that in certain areas, like I've talked to people who lived in Arizona, and I mean worked with and spoke with them, and they've told me that the prevalence of thrift stores are not so common. But antique stores are still really common. Well, in the area I live in, their antique stores are not common. The antiques just wind up in the thrift store as donations, and you will find things that are obviously somewhat primitive, but they're just donated, to the thrift store. And so I do think that's really interesting. They may be carried in a family for generations, and then they are given up, but you still imagine that that energy is still attached, perhaps. The memories and the things that are involved with that, and how much it, either works with your own, energy by energy, I mean like, you feel drawn to it or not. And I might be a little biased about that because, a lot of people, it's convenient, but some people do. They will be drawn to objects for no reason. Even as you mentioned with houses, sometimes people are drawn to houses that won't really serve them well, that tend
Yeah,
to have a lot of issues, but they insist upon keeping it. It's really interesting.
it is. I also think too when it comes to people, and this, I was thinking about this because of the last episode we recorded tonight. I think that different combinations of people and their energy and their personality, I think, can lead to things happening or not happening. And so I do wonder with these
Mhm.
objects that people are collecting or finding, how much of it, I mean, would that same, let's say that book that I just mentioned, that cookbook, Let's say it
Yeah.
went to some other family's house. Would there be anything weird that would happen with that book if, let's say, the energy of the people there was not somehow compatible with that book? Would anything even happen at all? And there would just be a regular cookbook to them, just like you were talking about with famous haunted places or places with a lot of activity, like Amityville or whatever. So often you hear this about a place that becomes famous. The families that move there after will say, "Well, nothing has ever happened for us."
Yeah. It's always perturbed me kind of like, how could that be? But it must have something to do. And, I would suspect it does have something to do with the way that the individuals are interacting with the environment or with those objects or those locations that they are having some sort of a psychical connection that is unique. And when it appears and displays, and it, you know, I guess, how would you put it? You know, expresses the way that it does, and it must be something, it might have something to do with just something about the mind of the individuals that it's actually connecting with, that it gets an outlet for in some way. I do think
Yeah.
there's something, and like, like when you were talking about your cousin and the experiences you had, that when they were separate, when you two boys were separate, it wouldn't really so much. Well, maybe for you it didn't matter, but like maybe it was a catalyst though in a way that he was also able to experience by, um, that the two of your psyches were interacting, because there is an interaction.
Mhm.
When two people are together and they are, communing and talking and sharing ideas, and even as a child, just kind of visiting and enjoying, watching movies or having snacks or whatever children would do. Um, that there's an interaction between their minds, and
Yeah.
so that they together there could be some kind of an experience that would not be experienced otherwise if they were just on their own. So I have no doubt.
Yep.
I believe that makes a lot of sense, and that works okay with that works fine with the paradigm that I understand the world to be. So I think it's possible.
Yeah. Let's get through two more stories here, and then we'll probably call it. But so the second one is long, so we'll start with this other one here first. This one says, "So I don't believe in the paranormal. I'm not religious, and I haven't ever had a paranormal experience. But the other day, I always like that. But the other day, I was with my boyfriend, and he went to the bathroom, and then I heard him yelling, 'Hey!' But it's across the opposite side of the house, away from the bathroom. Me not thinking too much of it, I responded with, 'Hey,' back, but there was no response. So I went to the bathroom and asked my boyfriend if he said 'hey' to me. He said he thought I was talking to someone else, but he heard the sound as well. I'm just really confused. Should I be worried?" And that's where that one ends. Um, as always with these accounts, I would say if nothing else happened, then no. If nothing else before or after happened that was aggressive in any way, I would say no. I would wonder again. I wonder how often mimic accounts of voices, or even people seeing people that they know, how often
Mhm.
are they? I mean, yes, I do think that mimics can exist, but also how often are they just again? I know I mention this constantly, but how often are there just two different periods in time somehow interacting in the same space?
Yeah, you mentioned it. We had a. I mean, this comes up often.
Mhm.
That people have a singular event, but the negative events are either there's something paranormal that happens and something absolutely negative that they
Mhm.
correlate it with, and it all ties together that way. In other accounts, it's a building, a sort of a cumulative effect where they have multiple strange experiences, and they are also accompanied by negative experiences or, you know, pitfalls
Yep.
is what I've heard the term, where things just do not go well, and they continue not to go well, and the experiences continue, and they begin to correlate that the experiences are maybe in relation to these pitfalls. Um, and they begin to see that there is something negative about the influence on a psychical, environmental level from something in the unseen realm. And in those cases, it's clear that there's some correlation, and that's why they begin to differentiate between, is it something to do with the person, is it in quotes attachment, or is it environmental, like meaning the land or the house, and they can leave it behind and it ceases. The interaction was just that whatever energy was in the land or the house, they wanted them to leave. So you have accounts
Yeah.
like that, and the person, they leave and then it stops. But then there's the other occasions where they leave and it continues, but it's accompanied by these paranormal experiences and these negative outcomes in their real life. But many times over, they have these paranormal experiences and there is nothing negative to connect to it. And in fact, I want to mention right now that, you know, if you were just watching for coincidences and things like that, there are so many and they are plentiful in your life if you're watching and paying attention, and everyone encounters them where it's just these synchronicities of sorts. And I do correlate that to being a type of paranormal experience in and of itself. And they are not paired with negative experiences. There are positive outcomes that can come from that. And so, and there are accounts where they do, like you were saying with someone speaking, but there's no one there, but they are being reminded of something, and it's terrible. It's not ideal that they
Yeah.
correlate, even brushing against that they may still be having communication with loved ones or the otherwise, and they're terrified because of social constructs about what that might mean.
Yeah. And I think the sightings where someone sees someone they know, and that other someone, they give the experience or like a evil smile or stare or whatever. That to me, that's seems like it's okay. That's not just a time anomaly. That's some other being taking on that form. And so I think there are differences, and
Well, yeah,
but
you
I
would
think
not be afraid of a
yeah,
beloved grandmother,
right,
if you do encounter your grandmother, but you were terrified of them because they looked malevolent.
yeah,
They could probably choose how they want to present themselves, and so, but
yeah,
people are sometimes so desperate to make contact again with their
yes,
deceased loved ones that they're willing to accept whatever form it comes in, even though that individual may have moved on to another way, or, you know, it's beyond their control. But there are mischievous spirits, as we've been, as I have, well, in the many tales and folklore, there are tales of mischievous spirits. So I can't speak of that directly, but there are accounts that they exist and that they do such things. I guess is the best way
yeah,
to put it. Yeah.
yeah. And I don't share all the stories I find online, but I can tell you how many I found of people who say, well, this loved one passed away, and at the same time or after, this happened or that happened in the house or in the space or around these people that was negative, and the thing that a lot of people ask is, why is this loved one doing this, and or is it
Yeah.
something else? And so often I think, unless that person that did pass away was a terrible person in life, which is always possible. Um, but if the actions after their passing seem unlike them, then it may be someone else. It may not be them. And I think you have to
Yeah.
be careful with that at all times.
When my grandmother passed away, my mother was there for the entire thing. And she told me that she saw what looked like shadows kind of passing back and forth in the back room in the hallway of my grandmother's house. And she sat with her, and this was a very trying time because it was a long um a long passing. but she
Mm.
sat with her and
Yeah.
sat with her and sat with her. And she began, I don't know if it was from sleep deprivation or how it was, but she began to see these, what she described as like shadows. And it wasn't negative. She didn't think it was negative at all. She didn't say that. She just said that I was seeing this, and I thought that they were, she said that she thought that they were, that they were coming to kind of be helpful in a way, that it
Hmm.
was something helpful. And, there was nothing negative attached to it whatsoever. And there was nothing, it was just it's very difficult, that sort of transition. But her account of it was like that. Now, I mean, as far as like when people do say that, and, just that whole event itself, when they're describing that, it didn't seem like the individual, but I was coming across this individual and it was so negative in some way. And it must be related to something malevolent. You know, I don't know. I know that there is something clearly happening when people are passing away, and you know, I don't know, that talk of the recent story about my mother. I remember her telling me that, and um, just how difficult that was, and that the way that she recalled it, that and she is as I guess as a professional as anyone, just a professional in the world, an
Hmm.
accountant and a secretary, a bookkeeper, and just and not given to too many whimsies, but at the same time that she was seeing things in a way as she described it. I did not think it
Right.
was negative in any way, you know. So
Yeah.
it just it's hard to kind of move on conversation from. I'm not sure. I was trying to say something else, but the point is that people do have these encounters with these individuals in a way, and how they interpret it, it's difficult to tell. And the negativity around it, I don't think it's to do with, I think that, well, there's whole accounts of, you know, that there is a realm where, if that's the case, that these individuals are floating around lost,
Hmm.
that there are literally strangers um, of a type in the spirit realm that have access to this realm, then people may encounter them, especially if
Yeah.
they're sort of loose leafing through having paranormal encounters, especially children, like young people playing around with Ouija boards and seances and things like that. But adults are given to it too, and it happens. But
Yep. Well, I understand what you're saying. Words are hard, as I always say, and
yeah, once you
so
get on a
let's get.
train of thought, it's hard to kind of, you kind of touch a chord, and then you sort of,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, yeah. But yeah.
Well, I have one more. We'll share one more story here. This is a longer one, and this looks like it goes in a completely different direction. So we'll see what you think of this one after. So this one says, "Okay, I'm pretty sure this was a skinwalker, and for good reason. Either that, or it was a really weird coincidence. Before I tell my story, I want to say that I live in Canada, and in Native American stories, skinwalkers are a big thing. And everyone that I have talked to that lives in the area by where I have my experience has their own stories that are similar to mine. That's why this freaks me out so much. So here's the story. I live in the city, but my family has land a few hours outside the city in the middle of nowhere. One day I was out there with them, and it was a nice late fall night. The moon was full, and it was really bright. I could see pretty far into a field, which I normally couldn't do at that time of night. It was about midnight. My dad went inside the house that we were renovating to go do something for a little while, so I just stayed outside to enjoy the weather. Out of nowhere, I heard this weird noise coming from the forest on our property about 300 feet away. It sounded like a yell from something in pain. So I just brushed it off as a dying animal because there are a lot of coyotes out there, and they frequently move through our property. About 5 minutes went by, and I was in the middle of doing something when I turned around to see this full white dog staring at me, maybe 10 feet away. And I looked at it, and something seemed off about it, but I thought it was just the moonlight mixed with me being tired, making me see things or something. So, of course, me being the dog lover I am, I went inside the camper we had out there to get dog treats that we keep for my dog. So I grabbed 2 treats and I said hi to this dog, and I went up to it and it just stared at me, but its body language was kind of blank, like it didn't seem to have any emotion behind it. So I offered it a treat, but it just kept staring at me. I was closer to it, and I could see that it was, in fact, weird looking. It had almost human eyes, and it just stared at me. So at this point, I was kind of getting creeped out, so I just took a few steps back, and all of a sudden, it just swung its head toward the forest, where I assume it came from, then back at me. It did this about 4 times before staring at me for 5 seconds. Then it bolted fast right towards where I heard that weird yelling noise from earlier. Me being freaked out, I went and grabbed my dad's shotgun and sat there with it, staring through the window of my camper, where it just went. And I swear I saw something in the woods, but I just couldn't make anything out. I don't know what it was, but I'm a strong believer that there are things out there like skinwalkers. There has to be a reason that cultures from all around the world have similar stories to go with similar creatures. I don't know. It could have just been a random farm dog or something like that, but that's a lot of creepy things all happening at once for me to not
Yeah.
think it's a skinwalker. This is a long one, so it's still going here.
Oh, oh,
No problem. Um, After telling the story to some of my friends that live in that area, they told me very similar stories and experiences they had, and they are strong believers in it, so I don't know. There has to be a reason, and apparently it is most likely a skinwalker or a scout for a skinwalker. I was thinking it could be, and then they have this word here that's in another language, um, native probably, but it was too dog-like to be one. And apparently this, and I'll just spell it. It's ADLET. Adlet is a type of dog-human hybrid, and I found that I had to look online for that because I didn't know what that was. But so there you go. That's where that one ends. So go ahead, Jen. If you have any thoughts.
yeah. Many times over again, you hear about these entities that collect the semblances of their environment, and they're able to take it up, the personification of themselves, you know, as necessary in the environment. It's far fetched. It is the thing of mythology, as you're describing, of legends, and of lore that is carried on generational over and over again, where you have things that do not look quite right, but they are animalistic, and many times they are even personifications of loved ones that people have known, and they show up and interact with them, but the individual knows that there's something just not quite right with them. I do think that, I mean, it's hard to say. It's funny that the individual, you know, it's encouraging that they went and they did believe this to be a normal dog, but then they thought that this is not how dogs act. Now, that's a little fuzzy, but it's because, not every dog's gonna react the same, especially a wild farm dog. May not even know what
Right.
a treat or being given a treat even is.
Yeah.
So you have aspects of that, it's true. But the intelligence of those creatures, anyway, regardless, there was something to do with what was going out in the forest. Um, I think with the Skinwalker lore, though, it the the different regional aspects, that it's not just located on a particular family, but it's something experienced by others in the immediate vicinity. When there's stories described like that, they tend to carry a lot more weight and validity. But I believe that even an individual who believes that there was something, odd about the interaction, it should stand out and be important, because it could have some kind of significance relevant to that individual. But the classic tales of these scammers and the way that they take up the appearances of things that are around them, many times things they have consumed. It's really fascinating. So it's almost like, have you ever seen that movie Fallen with Denzel Washington?
Um, Only once and only bits of it years ago.
It
Um,
was this Yeah, it was this whole idea of this entity traveling through touch.
yes, I have seen parts of
Yeah.
that. Yep.
So like the entity is an intelligence unto itself, and it travels through animals or people. It reminds me a lot of The Thing. The Thing with the way there's a type of alien force, a type of alien intelligence. It's almost like our cyclical environment, even in this culture of technology and progressism, the progressionism and everything else. There's still these old tales. That is classic Skinwalker interaction, in the way that those stories are describing it. Even in pop culture films, that is exactly what it appears to be. But the actual accounts you hear from people encountering them are pretty uncommon. Like I've never heard. Um, well, I don't know if I could say I've never heard, but I'd have to think about it. Where there might be something that could have been that. But there's a belief system that there is a type of entity that can take up the personification of something it consumes. In the case of skinwalkers, well, that's more like Wendigo folklore, but
Hmm.
just what they see, even they can actually mimic it. So you have that mimic coming up again, and that idea in the paranormal world. In this case, though, it seemed like it was almost warning the person. It was trying to or was trying to draw attention to whatever was going on in the forest as the dog kept looking back into the forest. So it makes you wonder about when people encounter loved ones that are not the actual loved one, but the entity is using the visage of the loved one to communicate some kind of information that it believes they would not take seriously if they did not take on that sort of personification. So
Yeah.
it just depends on
Yeah.
each account. It's mysterious, really bizarre. So it
It
takes
is.
a lot. Yeah.
I've never really had any encounters out in the woods that I can think of directly. The only thing I had happen once when I was a kid, I used to go to this summer camp for kids with visual impairments, and this one night it was at night, and of course I've always been a night owl, so I was just laying there in bed, and everyone else seemed to be asleep, and I started hearing this chanting, shouting, kind of these voices coming from the direction of the fire pit. And but it was really weird because they were all perfectly timed with each other. It was like there were several voices, and I didn't recognize any of them. It didn't sound like the counselors, not exactly anyway. And they were chanting and like shouting, and but it was all perfectly in time with each other. And it went on for a few minutes, and then it just stopped. And no one else in the cabin appeared to notice. No one else woke up that I could tell. Uh, and it just was the weirdest thing. And I to this day I wonder, was that? I mean, what was that? Was that spirits? Was that other beings? Was that? was that even happening out there, or was it something that was directed right at me? Because of course I seem to be a magnet for a lot of weird experiences. I don't know, but that was when I was like, I don't know, around the same age actually as my experiences at my cousin's house. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know what that was.
So many times, I mean, experiences out in the woods, out in nature are so different. I mean, well, no, I shouldn't say that, but in my personal experience, the experiences I had, and because I had moved out, and I had lived out in the boonies, as you would call it, when I was growing up in Texas, and I had experiences out there, as a child, but um, then mostly living in town and then eventually in cities, and there were paranormal experiences there as well that
Yeah.
I would account that they were paranormal experiences that were pretty prevalent. But the nature of how they interact and they do appear to be entirely different. Now I know that that's just from a secondhand, like anyone listening, it's like that's my personal accounts and things like that. But when I was an adult and living out in the woods, which I did for several years out in the
Hmm.
woods, and the things I encountered out there were completely unique. Almost like encountering a domesticated animal versus a wild animal, but on a paranormal level. So it's almost like, like when I was living in cities and towns, there was a certain level of the type of intelligence of how it acted, and then when I was living out in basically just a very secluded property out in the middle of absolutely nothing, the paranormal experiences reflected that as well. They seemed almost more curious, and it was like there was something about it like that was at play of s- these energies that are out there. I don't hate the term energies, but like these intelligences, or the way that the psychic mind or the psyche mind, and I'm not psychic, but the way that the mind interacts with that environment versus the way that it interacts with the more, you know, day-to-day environment, quite a bit different in some
Yeah.
regards. Yeah.
Yep. No, I agree. I agree. Well, that's a seems like a good place to stop for tonight. Thank you again, Jen, for being here as always, and looking
Sure
forward to
enough.
the next time.
Me too, James. Have a good night.
You as well, and thank you all for listening as well. And yeah, we'll be back again at some point soon here to do another show, a couple of shows here. So, and thank you all for listening. And I will talk to you all next time on Salsido Paranormal. Take care.